It started here, in the guest bedroom. Gruesome stains marked the spot on the mattress where a woman was beaten over the head before being grabbed by her ankles and dragged to the ground. From there, a trail of gore leads through the hallway, around a scattered pile of books, and into the den. It's here where the trail ends, terminating in a dark red pool beneath Ruie Ann Park's broken skull. It took at least 10 blows to end the 75-year-old's life and to begin one of the most twisted murder mysteries the state of Arkansas has ever seen.
This is a story that has more tragedy to it than just the murder of Mrs. Park. It's got numerous victims and numerous perpetrators.
Their home on Logtown Hill was called the Showplace of Van Buren, Arkansas, a name befitting of the people who lived within.
The Park family was a really prominent family in town. Hugh Park and his wife Ruie Ann, they both owned the Press-Argus newspaper, which in those days we got our news from the newspaper. So owning a newspaper in and of itself was a big deal.
And being a big deal was apparently important to the family's matriarch, Ruie Ann.
She was president of the Garden Club, president of the Library Fund.
She wanted to be involved in everything. She thought she was a real upper crust lady.
But Anita Paddock grew up with the Parks and is revealing new details to Crime Watch Daily from her book Blind Rage, including that being well-connected didn't necessarily make Ruie Ann well-liked.
I wouldn't say she had any enemies, but she just did not have a nice personality.
There was one person who always brought out the best in Ruie Ann, and that was her only child, Sam Hugh.
Sam was the apple of his parents' eye, and they really put him on a pedestal. He's very bright and had lots of talents.
Then, when Sam Hugh was around 5, the Parks decided to adopt a second child, a 7-year-old girl named Linda.
When she first got Linda, oh, she dressed her up in these cute little dresses and big bows in her hair, and it was like, look at me, I'm the most magnanimous woman. I've gotten this little girl out of the orphanage. But people saw through that.
The reality was, soon after Ruie Ann took Linda in, she regretted it.
She was very, very shy. She wasn't nearly as smart as Sam.
Linda, consequently, didn't get the same attention from her parents, specifically her mom. And her mom and her, I understand, had a rather rough relationship.
Hugh and Ruie Ann later divorced, and after high school, both Sam and Linda enrolled at the University of Arkansas, embarking on 2 very different life paths. Linda got married and settled into a quiet life of obscurity about 3 hours away in Cabot, Arkansas, while Sam Hugh graduated law school, returned to Van Buren, and found success as the youngest ever U.S. prosecuting attorney of the 5th District of Arkansas. But in a town where some people's social views were as old as the Civil War battles once fought here, Sam was both part of the in-crowd and an outcast.
He was gay at a time when it wasn't politically correct to be gay. And that was one of the things that caused a lot of people to dislike him.
Including authorities.
The police agencies in particular disliked him. They didn't like his lifestyle.
He had young men that he would get out of jail maybe for vagrancy, and he would bring them to his house, and they would do odd jobs for him, and he was drinking, and there was lots of loud parties there.
Unfortunately, Sam's partying started to become an everyday thing, and he would eventually lose his job as a state prosecutor. At some point, he moved into one of his mother's 3 rental properties just a few hundred feet from the main house and opened up his own law practice. But clients weren't exactly banging down his door.
Sam had a tremendous need for money at the time, and there were numerous statements from Sam's acquaintances saying that he was constantly trying to borrow money from his mother.
There were even reports of heated public exchanges between the two, some occurring just a few weeks before the night that would change everything. May 16th, a Saturday.
Sam was with us that evening. In fact, had supper with us and was in good spirits.
Then, just before 7, Sam told the couple he wanted to get home to catch a movie on TV. Later that night, Sam chit-chatted with his mother on the phone before drinking himself to sleep.
And the next morning, when Sam woke up, he had a hangover. He woke up and he saw his mother's newspaper still laying where she demanded it be thrown. And he thought, that's strange.
And when the paper was still there hours later, he thought worse than that.
There were 3 keys to the house. He had one, his mother had one, and Linda had one. And so he went and used his key, and then he walked through the kitchen into the den, and there lay his mother's body, and she was dead.
And hysterical Sam Hugh calls police, then his sister.
Linda was home, and he told her that their mother was dead, and she just fell apart over that, and she was very, very upset.
By the time Linda arrives at the house with her husband Howard, several hours later, detectives have already poured over the scene.
I understand there was no sign of break-in, and Mrs. Park was real careful to lock her house, and she was well known for that. There was no sign of burglary. There was no sexual violation.
The police investigation basically revealed that someone had managed to get inside this woman's very substantial defenses and had beaten her around the head. It looked like a crime of anger because of the number of blows.
So, who was angry enough to execute such a brutal crime? Immediately after discovering Ruie Ann's body, some officers set their sights on one suspect, and one suspect only, her own son, Sam Hugh. She had a reputation around town for being someone to avoid. But someone went to the violent opposite extreme, getting up close enough to bludgeon Ruie Ann Park at least 10 times, leaving her to die in a pool of her own blood. To police, the attack seemed personal, and with no signs of a break-in, they immediately questioned the only 2 people with access to the home, Ruie Ann's children, Sam Hugh, and her adopted daughter, Linda.
Linda was there at the scene, yes, shortly thereafter. She was there with Sam and me and my wife.
Linda tells investigators she was at home with her youngest child in Cabot, about 3 hours away. As for Sam,
They asked him where he was the night before, and Sam's alibi basically was, gee, I got drunk and I passed out. I don't remember anything.
that made Sam the only person around who had a key to the home, a home the cash-strapped attorney also stood to inherit.
Immediately, the law enforcement was focused on Sam as being the person that murdered his mother.
But to the people who knew Sam, the real reason police suspected him so quickly had little to do with any real evidence.
In one word, homophobia. He was gay. They just figured that it's just an obvious situation where a gays murdered their mother. That's what gays can do. They were so focused on pinning it on Sam that they ignored evidence that would indicate otherwise.
Some might say substantial evidence.
Ruie Ann had a long black hair clutched in her hand. Sam didn't have long black hair. He had real short brown hair. There was a handprint, a bloody handprint, on the refrigerator door that I don't know if any prints were ever taken off of that.
And then there was the fact that not long before her death, Ruie Ann had actually reported a prowler on her property. In the days and weeks that followed, authorities continued looking at Sam alone. But then it wasn't a completely baseless investigation.
Right after the murder, they have this person who's in jail says, Sam told me he did it. And they have another person who said, Sam told me he was planning to do it. And so at that point, they were convinced Sam did the murder.
They performed a lie detector test on Sam. He passed the lie detector test. The examiner of it said, well, obviously, because he's so smart and because he's a lawyer, that he figured out how to trick that test.
The test had to be graded as inconclusive, and that was another reason why the police felt like Sam was the correct suspect.
But then District Attorney Ron Field says he wasn't so sure.
The police requested warrants from our office, and at that point I refused to give them the warrants. The proof, in my opinion, it's just not conclusive.
Authorities continued searching for the smoking gun that would put Sam away. But no such evidence was needed in the court of public opinion.
Everybody in town thought that Sam had gotten mad at his mother and that he had killed her.
After that, Sam just really let himself go. He pushed his friends away, and his whole life, his whole living situation, and his law practice and everything came apart.
Sam's drinking, already a problem, became completely out of control. Once he started ordering whiskey by the gallon, Rusty and another friend tried to stage an intervention. But Sam's last words to them were, quote, "I haven't the least desire to stop drinking, and I intend to die like this." Not long after that, Sam started coughing up blood.
He was as yellow can be, and his liver had swelled up. I understand he was distended, his belly was.
It was a little under 2 years after his mother's death that Sam Hugh, the only suspect in her murder, was rushed to the hospital. The question was, just how many answers were going with him? She was one of Van Buren, Arkansas's most prominent citizens, beaten to death inside her own home. Shortly after the murder, authorities set their sights on one suspect, the woman's only son, Sam Hugh Park.
The police stopped the investigation when they came to Sam, and they came to Sam within minutes of discovering the body.
But before investigators could dig up enough evidence to get an arrest warrant, Sam took himself out of the equation.
Sam was in the hospital dying of liver failure.
Just drinking too much over too long of a period of time.
It hadn't even been 2 years since his mother's brutal murder when Sam Hugh died from the effects of alcoholism. He was just 40 years old. To many in town, his passing closed the case on Ruie Ann's murder. Sam was guilty, and he had just executed his own death sentence.
Sam was a suspect until he died. Even after he died, was still certain that he committed the crime.
But nearly 3 hours away in the town of Cabot, Sam's adopted sister Linda was positive her brother had nothing to do with it, even though she had barely seen him since the murder. The fact was, her mom's death hadn't been the only trauma she was dealing with.
She had found out her husband was having an affair. She was very, very sad.
But before she could confront him, she got pregnant with his fourth child. Linda stuck it out in silence, never letting on what she knew, which she says made it all the harder when shortly after her brother's death, Howard decided to leave her for the other woman.
They got a divorce, and she got the 2 little boys, and he took the 2 big boys.
Howard also got their house and most of their other assets. Linda initially agreed to the arrangement, but when she got word that Howard had bought his new girl an expensive engagement ring, something snapped inside the normally meek woman.
One time, she came up here for a visit, and she came to our house, and that's when her attitude changed, and she got mad, and she wanted all the boys and wasn't gonna just take whatever Howard gave her. She was going to fight for that.
Howard got the message and arranged a private meeting with the newly transformed Linda. Just a few hours after that meeting, the murder of Ruie Ann Park was no longer unsolved.
My wife Linda and I had returned on a trip, I think from a vacation, and just pulled into a store here in Van Buren.
And right in front of us was the box where you come buy a newspaper. and there was Linda's picture on the cover of the paper.
Linda Martin, a woman many people in Van Buren had forgotten even existed, was under arrest for the vicious bludgeoning of her own mother.
We were shocked, absolutely shocked to hear that Linda had done it.
So just how did authorities unravel one of the biggest murder mysteries their small town had ever seen?
We get a phone call one night from an attorney, and he said, I have her on tape admitting killing this woman.
That attorney was Linda's husband, Howard. And as it turns out, before arranging that meeting with his ex, he had arranged a deal with Van Buren police to have his own office wired. Linda had left Howard's office emotionally drained, but unaware her secret was out, until she got the knock on her door later that night.
We sent the police there, and they took a statement from her, and she fully confessed.
She had no choice. In the police cruiser on the way back to Van Buren, officers played Linda the tape of her meeting with Howard, which included passages like this. Howard, I've just got to know, why did you do it? Linda, you really were both a lot alike. You all demolished me. Howard, you demolished yourself when you killed her. Linda, I didn't mean to.
So we had conclusive evidence that she did it.
Linda goes on to tell police that the fuse was lit the weekend her husband was out of town on a camping trip, and she found out he was having an affair.
On a whim, she decided she would drive to Van Buren, hoping that her mother might put her arms around her and say, everything's gonna be all right. You have a home here. I love your children. But that's not what she said.
Instead, Ruie Ann tore into the girl she had always considered a disappointment.
She told Linda she shouldn't have married that man anyway, and she shouldn't have had all those kids, and she berated her like she always had. Linda told me she snapped. She went into a rage. There was a gavel that had come off of a plaque that Sam Hugh had gotten when he left the U.S. prosecuting attorney's office. And it was just lying down on the table. And so Linda picked up that gavel.
And with a minimum of 10 deadly blows, she dispensed her own twisted justice. After that, Linda quietly slipped out of the house and drove back to Cabot, throwing the murder weapon out along the way. It's possible no one ever would have found out if she hadn't taken her husband's spare car to commit the crime.
He was such a control freak that when he got home from the camping trip, first thing he did was go and see if Linda had driven that car. And he saw the discrepancy in the mileage. So he put two and two together, and he harassed Linda until she finally admitted to him, yes, I did it.
Then, according to Anita Paddock's book, Blind Rage, Howard sat on the information until it served him.
There was never a trial. The murder charge was dropped to second-degree murder, and she was sent to prison for 20 years with the possibility of parole.
Linda ultimately served less than a quarter of her 20-year sentence, paroled after 4 years. Crime Watch Daily reached out for an interview. She declined to speak with us at this time, but then maybe she's already said enough.
It was a crime that, but for her husband calling and turning her in, would not have been solved to this day. And to this day, people have said Sam Hugh did it, and no, they didn't arrest him for it.